Good afternoon. We'll start in 4 minutes. We're just waiting for more people to sign in via Zoom. Good afternoon, everyone here in this room in MSI as well as online via Zoom. Uh, Today we are going to start the second in a series of seminar lectures for MSI at 50. Ano bang official name nun? Hindi ko maalala. Pwede na ba yun? My name is Maria Celia Malay. I'm a new faculty. Okay na rin sound. Okay. Yes, please.
I just want to make sure that the audio is still okay over Zoom. Can Abby or one of the comms team? It's very clear. The audio is clear. Okay, all right.
Okay. Hello again. Sorry for the technical difficulties. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Marie Antonette Juinio-Meñez, who was my mentor and also is an academician. She is a pioneer in multidisciplinary research. Her work encompasses organismal biology, population ecology, aquaculture, community work, as well as governance. She's unafraid to break new ground and try new approaches in pursuit of her strong and singular vision of developing marine invertebrate stock restoration and fisheries management in the Philippines. So today, she'll talk more about her work. I'll pass you over to Ma'am Annette.
Magandang hapon. Good afternoon to everyone. And thank you for being here and for the people at Zoom. So this afternoon, I'll share with you some insights and highlights of works of almost 4 decades at the Marine Science Institute and also with collaborators. I hope many of you know about marine invertebrates. So if you don't, you see these pretty little things here. These are the planktonic stages. Aren't they so pretty? Many of you probably are more familiar with the marine invertebrates that are benthic or that you find on your plates, right? But just to say that one of the highest diversities in the Philippines obviously are the invertebrate group. And so today I'll focus on socio-ecological approaches to marine invertebrate stock restoration and fisheries management. And very basically, this bears on helping meet the goal of improving resilience, both of coastal communities and ecosystems. Very often we think of one or the other, but they're very tightly intertwined. So my talk will be basically in 3 parts. Of course, I'll give an overview of marine invertebrates with focus on sea urchins and sea cucumbers. And then a big part of my talk will be to talk to you about culture-based management interventions on sea cucumbers and sea urchins as a way to look at how we can probably develop ways of or options to build on this in the Philippine setting, no, in the local context. And finally, look at ways into which science and also development and alliances can help scale up. Very often we think of our science, it's important to generate new science, contribute to knowledge, but where we can contribute to policy or actual trials on the ground, it's going to be very important. So, as I said, you probably like seafood, no? And seafood is a highly traded and sought after commodity, which is highly dependent on healthy ecosystems, right? Think about that. No? Yung kinakain nyo, usually, if they're from the wild, they're dependent on healthy ecosystems. Conversely, ecosystems are highly dependent on maintaining the integrity of the ecosystems on this high value organisms. So it's really an interplay. Invertebrate fisheries, no, globally in a review, are generally overexploited and collapsed. A study more than 10 years ago showed that 71% of invertebrate taxa, or 53% of the catches, are harvested through illegal or habitat destructive gears. And thus, generally, very undervalued, the importance of marine invertebrates. When you talk about fishery, everybody thinks of fish, right? Well, I hope you now think that there is shellfish, another important species. And more importantly, in the Philippine setting, invertebrates, nearshore invertebrates, are the key components of gleaning. No? How many of you from different parts, do you know what gleaning is? Paninghas, right? So if you work in the coastal areas, gleaning is a fundamental source of domestic food security, aside from high-value species. So we always forget, and even they say, pangkain lang po. But pangkain lang is very important for well-being ng community. So that's why it's important, not only for food security, but also nutrition. Hindi lang pangkain, no? And there's very little we know because it's undervalued in various aspects. So I'm going to talk more about tropical sea urchin sea cucumbers, while I will look at two major species, Strepnosis gratila on the left and Holothurius cabra. Many of you are science students, right? Species are good model species. You don't have to be specialist in one and think only about the biology. You can think of them as representative of functional groups, right? So while they are species focused, you can infer, are they have similar life histories? Do they live in the same habitats? To infer what other, because we cannot study all species, right? So you need sentinel or keystone species. And so the work that we do started with working on this because they're keystone species, especially in seagrass ecosystems and reef areas. And of course, they have high commercial value. So this is one of those that has export value. How many of you love Japanese food? Yeah, so one of the most important, most expensive are uni, and that is from the sea urchin bro. On the other hand, Holothurians are known for trepang. Again, it's known to be one of the emperor's food, right? So in traditional times in China, only the very rich can afford this. And if you're in a laureate that has something like this with abalone, you better be sure that's a very rich family. It's a signature of social status. So there's a lot of culture, but they're also very ecologically important in nearshore. This is an important grazer, and this is an important deposit feeders. And we have developed culture technologies for this over the past years. So let me just briefly share with you the importance of science generating new knowledge. Some of you might be confused. Ano bang gagawin ko? Will my work have any value? Basic science, knowledge for knowledge sake is also important. But in a tropical setting, when you work with commercially important species, they have direct implications in resource management. So one of the best studied seagrass communities in the tropics is the Bolinao. The work of Dr. Fortes for the many years. In northwestern Luzon, the biggest seagrass extent is found in Santiago Island. Right? So these are the earliest studies working with collaborators on the feeding ecology and trophic role of sea urchins in a tropical seagrass. For those of you who are familiar with Bolinao, so what are the sites? Locero, Silaki. Those are the basic sites you still go to. So if you study, one of the other value things is that we have so much data. We have baseline data to work with. So what did they find? That the sea urchins, they looked at two kinds, Strepnosis gratila and salmacis, are major grazers. They comprise almost, as they said, 24% of annual seagrass production during that estimation. They did feeding studies and they said that they consumed all types of the seagrasses. They did preference studies. So this is one of the very basic things in biology. What do they eat, right? But they noted that they avoided sargassum, okay, which is also abundant in those seagrass areas. So this is again in the 1993 early 1990s. So there are laboratory studies. I also want to show you through this the different approaches on how to generate science. But this is a story of fishery. Okay, so this is also one of the few well-documented fisheries, which was a multi-million peso loss. So here you will see a fishery collapse. In the mid-80s, it was a boom. There was a major market for Korean. So uni in this area was well known because the quality was so good because the habitat was good. Okay? But it collapsed in 1992. This fishery involves women and children, under wraps, picking the reefs, cutting them up. Various studies have since been done, even earlier on different aspects, early development, metamorphic rate, and this is one of the advantages of culture. You're able to study early development rates under controlled conditions. So here's one of our earlier studies looking at intrinsic and extrinsic factors affecting metamorphic rate. Oh, here I would mention that seaweed metabolites, when we looked at cues, showed that seaweed metabolites or sargassum, juice, and the like facilitated accelerated metamorphic rate. Okay. Earlier, more recent studies by Helen Bangi in the past few years looked at broader scale factors of populations. She looked at the effects of storminess and wave exposure by comparing different sites in northwestern Luzon, in Cagayan and Bolinao, and recently looking again at populations along areas where there is impact on eutrophication and seeing that there is phenotypic variation. The lanterns were significantly different, yung feeding nila. So it was already reflecting in phenotypes. And generally, you see here a decline in the Aristoteles lantern and quality of the gonad in different sites away from the stations, near the stations versus here. So now we have a problem that was not there before, which is eutrophication. Sea cucumbers are also very important species. They're known to improve sediment quality via bioturbation. Sea cucumbers are estimated to, depending on species and size, 9 to 82 kilograms per individual per year. So can you imagine the amount of sediment we're working? They're like earthworms in the terrestrial environment. They also are important in nutrient recycling, both through their working up and both through the fecal. And they have shown to be very important components of seagrass ecosystems. They have also other functions. They are important in the transfer of food chain, in the trophic areas. They are high biodiversity through associates live in them, as well as increasing alkalinity of water. So they're very important ecologically. What's the status of the fishery in Bolinao? So we did fishery independent assessment for those of you who have done this work. So there are many ways to study fishery. Fishery independent is you go in the field. So we looked at different reefs, types of habitat, seagrass, corals, and did a survey of the species. And what did we find at that time? This is in 2009, 2010. There's a very high species richness, over 40 species, and the diversity is high. But take note, so among the top species here, you see the average. Here is the square, the average size. In the arrow is the reported size at sexual maturity. Okay, so majority of the animals at that time were already immature, that we're finding, and densities were very low across all ecosystems, even the reef. So here you have less than 1 to about 9, the range per hectare from field, fishery independent studies. Take note of scabra, okay? That's about 4 individuals per hectare. Okay, even if you assume that is conservative. So we usually check that with fishery dependent studies, which is landed catch monitoring, doing interviews, focus group discussion with fishers who've been doing this for a long time. So here's the result of this study based on fishers who've been collecting in the past 30 years at the time we surveyed. And look, I want to put a pointer here, but here in the 70s, catch per day per person in kilogram wet weight. Can you see that? That's over 75 kilos. Can you imagine 75 kilos per person per day? Okay, up to the 1980s. And then in the 1990s, that's about 70. And then we have a drastic drop in the 20s. Okay, and the present here is 2010, earlier. So you can imagine what it is now. Okay, so what did they say? Well, earlier on, there's a dynamite fishing, hookah diving, destructive fishing practices, and then the fishmans. Okay, and then overfishing. They say, well, too many people are now collecting. This is not the only story here in Bolinao. This is true everywhere in the Philippines. You know, we've conducted national meetings and folks, it's the same story everywhere. Why? It's so easy to pick them up. They don't run away, right? And so we have also in Bolinao various studies that have gone from years. In 1988, there was a survey by Dr. Sonny de Guzman, and her estimate was 20 to 80 kilograms in Lucero. So it matches. When I came back, we did an inventory of surveys, and then we were finding 9 kilograms in Pilar. In 2022, Francis Nivales in Pilar, this is another place in Santiago Island, focused on sandfish, Trypneus, Holothurius scabra. And just want to point out to you, this is the mean search time, about 3 hours. They collect about 2.5, 3 kilos. And that's about 21 pieces. In that area, there were about 11 gleaners, total volume. And this is the total collected in a month, 5,000 pieces with a mean weight of 120 grams. Again, way below sizes, minimum size sexual maturity of most species. And this species, Holothurius scabra, the minimum size at sexual maturity is 180 grams to 200, early size at sexual maturity. So, no, so what do you expect? And you sum that up in a month, fresh, they were harvesting more than half a ton in the area of Pilar. Can you imagine half a ton? And you talk to people, yes, we used to step on them. They were all over the place. Even in the deep sea, they're soft bottom, right? And but at the time, they were being bought at 20 pesos per kilo. And this is the yield for half a ton, 13 pesos 500. Okay? Later on, I'll show you the price of this species. So there were various studies again, related to culture, such as this, in different stages to grow up, comparing growth in the seagrass area and the fish farm for bigger ones. And then we studied population dynamics in a study area that I will work on, the Sea Ranch. It allowed us to monitor population dynamics of restocked sandfish and looked at ways to make the culture cheaper, but understanding what do they feed when they're grazing. So we had floating hapa. So we looked at what are the factors affecting spatiotemporal variability. So we did this in Bolinao, the nursery system, and then did this across 4 sites and 4 regions to look at what are the factors that affect. Of course, rainfall, wind are the physical factors affecting periphyton biomass, okay, the food. But then again, emerging are interest in chemical diversity. Early studies by Karen Bontoc look at the mapping of saponin. Later on, students of ISA is working on that and has a team working on saponin and other important bioactive compounds now, and just published paper from one of the species we're working on, Holthuia Stichopus horrens, related to the development of smart materials. So you have trepa, but you have also a lot of other important bioactive compounds and materials from sea cucumbers. And we have over 1,000 species of sea cucumbers in the Philippines, 70 are known to be commercially important. So can you imagine the potential not of species diversity alone, chemical biodiversity? So second part of my talk is I'll talk to you about models that we developed. I talked about two models, taking you from the development through where it is now. So I'll talk about sea urchin. So we started with enhancing recovery of stocks through restocking, community-based grow-out culture. Michelle was with me. Dave, who's here, was here at the early start. So of this. And later on, we said, okay, aside from pens, can we scale up? Because sea cucumbers are very density dependent. You can't keep them in a cage or a pen. So we looked at the possibility of communal sea ranching of Scabra. In both cases, these were pilot cases. It's not been done before, but we were looking for how can we do this? What can we do to help? So what I'll talk to you about, just to give you a bigger picture, involves a lot of things, culture and management. So in the hatchery, it involves broodstock maintenance. I don't know where my pointer is. Anyway, this part. And of course, what you feed them when they're larvae, when they settle, and then the release. Grow out, whether it's sea ranching, restocking, of course, post-harvest value marketing. This will include networking, but I was also focused on this part and biophysical and social economic monitoring and how that leads to resource management. So what I'll talk about will be this three main components, but to know there's a lot of things going on in just developing the culture in hatchery. Okay. So this is the first model, and this is a model we thought of in 1998, which was inspired from the practice of fishermen in Nalvo, Ilocos Sur. You can learn a lot. One of my best mentors are fishers. You have to be open. So they were collecting wildlings, the small ones, putting them in pens and growing them up because it's a high delicacy food in the Ilocos market. We figured, okay, so might we use that approach? So this was a rude, so framework. So we have sea urchin grow out, okay, in pens like this. Okay, so we tried, of course, we needed to study recruitment. We had to do lab culture to produce juveniles, but we did environmental education. We did experimental sea pens, and we assessed ecological, economic, educational values as part of the effort of community-based coastal resources management. No? Community-based coastal resources management in the 1990s was Bolinao was one of the pilot areas, where we learned a lot of models was replicated in many parts. Sadly, it worked in many parts, but not necessarily in Bolinao. And you probably figure out why. So this was a framework. So I always start with a conceptual framework. You need to know the relation and where you want to go to, what the bigger picture is, so you know where you're doing and what does it relate to. So these were some of the experiments. Michelle, remember the studies? So we did feed type. Remember the study said they didn't like sargassum in the biology. But lo and behold, when we did our experiments, actually growth was better in sargassum. More importantly, gonad quality was good. So if you look at here, okay, lalo na in low stock densities, you have gonad index, which is the important thing in sea urchins, is the roe. It's not the test, it's the quality of the roe. So we know that this is important, thinning out. And so this study bore on how do we make that work? What is the science that we can improve? So we also looked at reproductive cycles over different periods, sampled animals, and this is the female gonad index, male, and this is the average. So first thing is very synchronous when they're in the cages, males and females. So you all know that they're broadcast spawners. So if they spawn synchronously, it's going to be possibly higher fertilization rates generally. And you have gonad yield if they're fed with sargassum. So this kind of information also gave us information on when to harvest them around new moon. Oh, here's my stock slide. Okay, so that was a ecology part, but the one directly applied to nature, to culture in the field. But then we wanted to see, well, what are the stocks doing? So again, we did fishery independent monitoring, laid transects in 3 sites, Lucero, Silaki, Victor Balingasay. And the ones here in red, this is the total number of individuals per 100 square meter, estimated from 3 replicate transects, monitored every month or every quarter when we can. And the red one is the number of early recruits. These are the juveniles that were less than 2 inches. So we know that they are recruit of the year. So what did we learn? Okay. So remember, it collapsed, the fishery collapsed, and I'll show you. So starting 2000s, we started seeing very big pulses. But the important thing is take note of when it happens. So this kind of information also tells you what are the broad scale factors. Why am I not paying attention so much on the adults? Because it's a fishery. So the abundance of adults is constrained by harvesting, but nobody harvests the small ones. So it is a marker of recruitment strength, right? So it is more likely dependent on natural factors, whether it's dispersal or habitat quality, we don't know. But you have to start with patterns. So this is one of the things I've been asking Kay. If you have a student, I have data for over 15 years now to look at. Are there broad scale factors affecting recruitment pulses? So here's the story of impact monitoring. Here's the collapse of the fishery. This is the culture. Take note. 1992, 94, started management interventions, size limits, and all of that. But it took almost 10 years before we started getting densities that were similar to those. Okay, so this was one of our seminal findings. And again, I have to acknowledge Michelle is here, Dave is here, and Helen Bungie. So they're going to be, we were doing this kind of work, monitoring. And so restocking, and there's some initial population density based on monitoring of stocks. And did it make a difference? So in fishery dependent, we looked at catch period effort data collected by Liana McManus in 1992 was a baseline. Past years, and indeed starting 2003, 2005, catch per unit effort was increasing. This study was also done in Northwestern Luzon with another CRM project. So here are small experiments in Poro Point, La Union. So here is when grow out culture in pens were continued, and this is the number of recruits. So basically, densities increased around the cages. Why do you think that is? Because the presence of conspecifics is one of the important cues of many planktonic and animals and invertebrates like sea urchins. That also happened in Sinait, so where they compared recruits higher in size with grow out versus without. Again, these are field experiments, so you can see, are there indications of presence of the density and spawning and release increasing? And of course, subsequently, Ingat started working on genetics. So she looked at the genetics. Basically, it was homogeneous across this area, including outgroups. Working with the physical oceanographers, look at the currents. And so, in North and South, there's this shifting, reversing currents, North and South. Some figured, yeah, they probably mix, right? So sometimes Bolinao stocks go all the way to and then back. And thus, the importance of maintaining stocks is important because they're like linked to each other, right? So this is an initial study on genetics and hydrographic factors. Then we monitored recruitment after 2003. So again, what did we find? This is 2008, 2009. So there are intra and interannual variability, which is exciting in itself. Understand? And we had some very strong years. Initial analysis were saying that it seemed to be related to the El Nino because it might be affecting the wind direction and the strength, affecting settlement in the seagrass area. But so we've continued to monitor this to say, this is the data I just got from the lab in the last 4 years. So yeah, there's a lot of interannual variability, but I'm very concerned. Look at the order of magnitude. This is in 200. This is 100 at the max. And this is the level, 20, less than 10, more than 20, compared to the other sites. Is there an impending collapse again? Oh gosh, I don't want to culture sea urchins again and release them, right? There is a size limit, but it's not implemented. Part of the policy inputs. So we move on. The second model is communal sea ranching. And so this is a model. We had a 5-hectare sea ranch, right? Where you have a release area. This is a research and outtake area na, a reserve area. The inputs are in yellow. Of course, we have to produce juveniles from the hatchery, but then we have to put governance mechanisms in place at the local level and at the LGU level. And the more important thing is monitoring and evaluation. Diba? How do you know it works? That is one important thing that science can do. Monitor and evaluate. Right? It's not enough to release, oh, we release, check. So what? Did it make a difference? And the objective was to develop a sustainable and viable bioeconomic communal enterprise. Bakit communal? It's hard to do a 5-hectare sea ranch by yourself. It needed cooperation because you have to have guarding 24/7. So a team would take turns, maybe 1-2 days for the turn to guard night and evening. So we looked at ecological impacts and private as well as public benefits. Ito yung indicators. We want to promote social equity, making sure that small fishers also benefit and others outside this area and maintain the population size. The government gave exclusive use rights, limited exclusive use rights to the PO we work with for harvest rights. So effectively, they take care of this area, but they have exclusive harvest rights. It makes a big difference. You know about the tragedy of the commons, right? If I don't get this, somebody else will. But if you give tenure and rights in an area that's defined, there's a certain level of certainty, so they can say, well, it's mine, so I can wait. So that is an important governance scheme. It had to be legislated by the LGU. So we went through a long process of barangay consultations and all the like, right? But this has to be linked to fisheries management. And take note, there are a lot of threats, natural threats, typhoons, okay? Now eutrophication and anthropologic threat, poaching. When you see the animals about this size, 100 grams, they're all over the sea ranch. So here is an example of our first monitoring. This is every quarter, monitoring 1, 2, 3. So take note, immature, less than 180, subadult, and 200 grams. We seeded 10 grams, 10 grammars, and in 6 months, we had animals reaching early size sexual maturity. So all the red ones, okay? This is the cut of the yellow for harvesting. Take note also that there was an effect in the storm. There's a shifting. I'll get back to that. So you can do this size frequency analysis, understanding the demographic status to monitor density, size frequency. So the size of sexual maturity, and this was important because clearly the first thing we met is definitely we had a spawning stock in the sea ranch. Definitely. Okay, so what is the other proof of concept? Well, we actually saw them spawning. The first time we saw them spawning, we were monitoring in Bolinao. And we were so excited because when they're ready to spawn, you hold them, they just let go, right? And then we get a call from Anda, which is our other sea ranch. We had 3 sea ranch pilots here. Brian was saying, Mom, they're spawning here at the same time in Bolinao and in Anda. And there were mass spawning. And subsequently, the fishers would watch them and say, oh, Mom, they actually spawn every month. So you see, and we had an estimate of 500 individuals per hectare in that sea ranch. So what does it do? It can increase synchrony. It can be spilled over by migration. But important thing is we had a spawning. So you can rebuild a spawning population in a managed area. So we did size frequency distribution. The animals were tagged with fluorescent dyes. Wala silang skeleton, but they have spicules. And so you can actually see the spicules and know, well, these animals will release at this time at this size, this batch, cohort, not individuals, and they were this size. So we did von Bertalanffy growth equations based on size frequency distribution, and we could determine that in 1 year, there's a big size range. Some can grow to 180 grams, others to 300 grams. Okay. But there was this Emo, frequent typhoon, and look at this size. And this is what is a risk. The animals were stunted. They didn't die based on their size frequency distribution. They shifted to the smaller sizes, 50% less. They're very sturdy, but they shrink. So they can shrink, but they can recover when the conditions go well. So this is also understanding factors. So they're very good sentinels because they respond. They can be indicators of changes in the environment if you monitor them. And so the other thing is, because these are the spicules, you look under the epifluorescent microscope. So we know that animals, you just get a little piece, which with spicules that fluoresce, were released from the hatchery. No? Kasi we stain them with calcine and tetra. Is that? So when we get animals and monitor all the 80 grams and below, which we assume to be recruit of the year based on the one I showed you, which is the minimum size. So we are able to show all the 80 animals, less than animals. So the ones in red were stained. No? Surely they were hatchery produced during the time, these monitoring periods, but they were unstained animals, which means there was natural recruitment in the sea ranch. That's very good, especially for genetic diversity conservation. And we continue to do that. And the last monitoring, I think, was 2019. And yes, they still have recruits. The presence of a high density ensured that they are like magnets. So their supply, you all know this from their source, but they're also a sink. And that's important to understand. And this is how you verify it. So yes, we were able to establish stocks. We built stocks, There were also social impacts. Our partners, our people's organization, this became a top demonstration site. It was the only one. It was visited by many groups, not only in the Philippines, but in different areas. And this was important for empowering our people. They feel they know. It is very important. So they're the ones explaining this, telling the people. So don't tell me when you talk to people, you want to simplify it because it might be too technical. I can tell you, I've explained to people recruitment dynamics, which other people say, oh, that's too complicated. People will not understand. No way. Do not underestimate the fishers. They know this stuff. You just need to know your subject matter and communicate it well. It's not something you read from a textbook and just blurb out. It's something that you know. They know this. They know what this means. This is like the pollen being drifted in the air. That is driven by the wind. Here you have the currents. They know this. Okay. There are also spillover benefits. So there was a baseline data of landed catch monitoring in Lucero and Pilar, 1998. And then people started telling us around 2013, oh, the sea cucumbers are increasing again. Because when we started, it was gone. There were very few. So we started doing landed catch monitoring and focus group discussion. And true enough, 2014, with focus group discussions, there were clear indications of recent increase of sandfish, which continued on to 2016. And so we also started writing papers on governance, right? Because it's not just about the sea urchins, it's about the governance. And governance is not about the local government. It's about the stakeholders taking action. And in this case, it's the communities. Just want to show that there are natural factors on the variabilities and problems, but there are social, internal, like in any community, that's why it's difficult, and external factors. and economic factors. So the bottom line is the economic returns are not realized. No, we had a few harvests and all of that. That is the other thing. You need to scale production. You harvest 30 kilos, dry weight is 2-3%. That's not even a kilo, right? So we continue monitoring. This is Josh just gave this to me this morning. 2021. So we had data 21, pandemic, there was low presentation, no operation in the pandemic. So that's the highest in the 10. This is in the 2022, and we started picking up. So we had to shift from communal sea ranching because, the head of the PO, who was very good, passed away. So the leadership was not good. And it was our research. It was our natural laboratory. So we took it on and we did buyback, so that they will grow and release them. And so far, the stocks are doing better. But it has shifted from communal to our experimental sites. And we're preparing it to be in a good site because we want to turn it over. When I retire, I don't know who's going to take care of the sea ranch. I want to turn it over to the LGU. Or is it the PO? Or will they lease it to a private company? But nobody's going to take care of the sea ranch if it's not in good condition, right? So now we focus on the research being done. And of course, continue to do the studies. You probably heard Josh study under Danos, thesis of students, understanding sources of mortality in early life stages. So I go on to the last part of my talk. So we have a lot of these models, we have a lot of information, but we know scaling is important, no, for ecological, especially economic impacts. So I'm going to go through different governance scales. So you have to understand governance scales. There's other scale you have to know from temporal, spatial, biological scales, right? Well, if you do resource management, you have to understand governance skills, things that happen in the community, at the local level, at the municipal level, at the regional, at the national, or maybe international. So what are the tools? The important thing is, how do you delineate management areas? And the most important tools from the Philippine perspective is biophysical and genetic connectivities, understanding biophysical and genetic connectivities. So this was a study by Rachel's group showing that regional genetic structure is not homogeneous, it's structured in various parts of the country. And we compared scabra, which is primarily seagrass, and now corens, which is seagrass but moves to the coral reef. So we have indicators for nearshore ecosystems. And we use data with the physical, looking at life history-based numerical modeling. So from dispersal, most of the things you should do dispersal, right? But what really counts is how many survive when they settle. So you need to couple them to the benthic habitat. So this is a model that couples dispersal with benthic habitat. And this is done by Diane with Kay, with modeling and inputs for us. That allows connectivity, settlement and benthic recruitment strategies. So here's the result of the genetic studies, the Rachel's group. So this is Cabra. These are the biogeographic areas. So the different dots are areas where you sampled population of the same species. If they're different colors, they're what? Genetically different. So clearly, population genetic genetic structure is showing you we have very diverse genetics. That is one ace, aside from species, that you want to maintain to sustain this valuable resource. And again, it's not scabra or horns, they're just model organisms. This is probably true, and we have other studies to show that. That is part of management, maintaining our diversity. So we used a multi-approach, multi-criteria framework. I'm not going to go through the details, but basically assessment from surveys, secondary data, connectivity modeling, linked to habitat maps. So we had people from ENG to look at the maps, which is used for the linking of the dispersal. And then, of course, the genetic stock delineation by Rachel's group to understand contemporary migration patterns, and then identify where are the areas in these flights that are already managed. For example, where are the marine protected areas? But you start with areas that are already managed, because the most difficult thing is having an area to release the animals that are managed. You release them anywhere, might as well say goodbye, right? And so looking through this, you look at the fishery, habitats, you get this for secondary data from souks in different areas. And this is the embudo. You know what the embudo is, right? It's the bottleneck, right? You can have the best science. Actually, you should have more than enough science. But this is the critical part. You don't bother with this. This is too local, right? Well, it is local in the Philippines because we have a decentralized system. You know, management municipal waters where you have the most diverse and productive ecosystems are under the jurisdiction of the municipal government. No, so temperate countries don't have that problem. Everything's taken care of, right? So it's very difficult to relate because it is too small scale. So here's an example of the larval modeling. Many of you are probably familiar, just showing you that these are your kernels. And this is the habitat coupling. You have sandfish that settles in the seagrass and can move to the mangrove areas. There's no fresh water. Horns that settles in the seagrass. So both of them has the seagrass nurse, but moves to the coral reef area. So that was how it was coupled with that and showed that here you can identify putative strategic areas based on average settlement success and the diversity index, meaning where are all the sources coming from, right? You want this for restoration and you want it also for restocking. And this is the initial result, and I hope we'll get this to show that within Northwestern Luzon, there is even finer structuring. It's not just one. So you have here, aside from the one here, it's different than the one here. So the rule of thumb we go is, well, precautionary approach. You get the brood stock and release it within 15, 20 kilometers where you have it best. That's a precautionary approach to maintain genetic stocks at the very least. And pulling that all together, we develop policy support advisories, conduct workshops, and here's how it comes out. You know, Northern Luzon, Sycamore fishery and resources, because it's not just the two species, right? The other species will have the similar life stage, life histories. So genetic management, why it's important, biophysical understanding the scale, that's important. And more importantly, talking to them, well, nothing will happen if you don't do what you do and you don't in your area and you don't coordinate with adjacent areas. So these are the management clusters. Okay? Bolina should work with other sites here. This site should work together, right? So we did this also for Palawan. So here's the output. And this is something that I should emphasize. All the best science, right? Management cluster alliances is very important because it's locally in the right context. Context in Palawan is different from Northwestern Zone and definitely different in Davao, right? So you need to figure out how to make that work within the local context, because governance of marine assets is essentially politically and socially determined process, however way you want it. Okay? So this is Davao. It's very complicated. We worked with the state colleges and we worked with commercial hatcheries, because who's going to produce? At that time, nobody was producing there. So we also trained and worked with the commercial hatcheries that are existing. They learned how to culture sandfish just like that. It's easier than doing fish, right? So there's a lot of it. So here again are the clusters in Davao Gulf. It's something to start with. This was fed back to them. We had workshops. The other important thing in our biophysical, physical colleagues will feel is scaling consideration is where, how, and when. You have this Philippine map, different climatic condition. Coron, for example, rainfall and very seasonal. Sarangani, where we worked with Alsons, Palawan aquaculture, very stable. And so the strategies will vary, right? So how do you make something? Nothing is one size fits all. Nothing. If you're an ecologist, you have to think, right? It always depends, right? So we developed the framework on adaptive integrated culture production systems, culminating with life. And so one of the strategies, well, let's diversify how we produce sandfish. So expensive to do the hatcheries on land. So expensive, we don't have this like the commercial hatcheries. And ponds are so expensive here, right? Well, maybe some of them, and we don't have marine ponds like Vietnam, but certainly the fishers cannot afford them. So we developed this whole scheme of ocean nursery and growth systems to ensure, well, we did floating hapas instead of here, which is what, and then we did, what if it's very rough? So maybe if it's very rough, we can do bottom set hapas, which is where we started in Bolinao, bottom set hapas. And you grow them to 3 grams, and then later on, say, well, when you release them in 3 grams, there's such a high mortality rate. Maybe we grow them bigger. And actually now we've gone from 15 grams to over 30 and 50, just to make sure that they attain the size of predator refuge, right? Predator refuge, crabs, fish. Kaso, that's also that size where they become attractive to the gleaners and the collectors. So it's a different kind of predator. I always say the one with 2 arms and 2 hands and feet. And you grow them from the small size. You can grow them in ponds where they're marine ponds. You can do sea ranching, which is a put and take, or restocking, which can be a reserve where you just build stock. So what does it do? It is also an adaptive culture system. So for example, in Palawan, there's a hatchery, there's a floating hapa at the bottom set. You have ponds there and grow up. So what do they do? This is the island. This is what's nice in archipelago. There are nooks and crannies. No? So aside from your habagat and kabihan, they're protected areas, the leeway sites. What do? The rain's coming here, or this monsoon. The floating huts are on the other side of the island, right? And the size, mas marami sila. And then pag reverse, kabila. No, we don't have smart aquaculture practices yet, but we can be creative and figure out ways. If you had one model, it won't work. You'll just have 6 months and they will not grow, right? Because bagyuhan na. So you have to find ways, and you figure out also the matching in the production in the hatchery. So the other key thing is not just the production system, thinking of the network of stakeholders. Who are the best ones to do hatchery? Mahal kayang hatchery. LGUs can't do that. Even if you can afford private sectors, you have very limited technical people who can run hatcheries 24/7. Okay? Well, ponds also, maybe. But here, you have a big area of areas where small fishers can be engaged and can be an important player in the nursery phase. And I'll show you, they can do floating hapa. We field tested this in Palawan, we field it. They can easily do that. Sanay sila. No? They can do it as individuals or communities, as groups or family groups, whatever, or barangays that can now have areas for this. We try this with indigenous groups in Mindanao and in Palawan, and partnerships with private investors, mga development projects in USAID or a leaseholder. And so, the adaptive nature of sandwich production opened many opportunities, spatiotemporal environmental consideration, but ensured, as far as I'm concerned, small fishers are important players and significant beneficiaries. Yan, hindi sila pwedeng echapuera. Because they're the ones who need mall alternatives more, and actually, they're the ones on the side. So why do we scale up? So we all show this, you talk on LGU, this is the slide like, wake up, right? Why? Scales of economy, right? Paano ka kikita? So what is the cost? Here is the smallest size, small, $100 in Hong Kong in Guangzhou in 2014. That's more now, right? But the size, you're going 300 to 400 to over $600 a kilo, premium grade, right? So we are not able to capture the benefits. We're harvesting 120, which is triple X, not export grade, right? And we're harvesting so many of them and not capturing the benefit and depleting the stocks, right? So price increases with size. There is a low supply, so we develop a national R&D to produce premium grade. Hindi lang to produce babies, hindi lang to produce juveniles, to get them to premium grade. Because this is the price. At that time, 30 to 40 pieces, well processed, $200. Large, $300. Premium grade, $400. This is how long it might take to grow them, depending on the site. Okay? So, if you do this, so the idea is in Bolinao, how do you scale up? So you need to increase production. And how do you do that? So you have hatcheries, ocean nurseries, so you have a network of production from the hatchery to the ocean nursery to the growing areas and different options, engaging different people, partners and LGUs. So here we have grow out in pens, nursery sites and release sites. So you go from increasing production of cultured juveniles, check. And how you do that? Not by increasing hatcheries, but downloading the ability for the POs to grow the spot. And we've shown that they can do it. What used to be us growing to 3 grams, taking us 6 to 8 months in the hatchery. Now we have only 3 months in the hatchery, and then we give it to them, and they grew it, right? So here is a development of a production cluster in partnership with the Asian Social Institute, we just started. So we train them, give them an orientation. When people say, why are we doing this? Do not underestimate them. A lot of the other technologies, this is how you do it. How? But never, why? And like I said, you think it's very basic, but they understand and they appreciate understanding what they see and connecting the dots. So we have groups, we have experiments, walking them through from the floating hapa to thinning them out. And lo and behold, they now have harvest. They're 30 to 50 grammars from the pen and ready to release in their own sea ranch areas. We're getting them exclusive use right for 1 hectare for each of the Bolina, Diwi, Pilar, and Dili. So they can release and grow them to premium grade, and it's theirs. Hati-hati sila, however arrangements they work it out. The other way is diversify through INTA. You know what INTA is, right? Okay, multi-trophic. But we want to focus on low trophic levels, the grazers, the filter. So here is a model. We have the sea urchins, which we know. You have a lot of drift sargassum, right? Katambak lang ang sargassum doon, no? You feed them the sea urchins, the feces fall, enriches the sediment, which is good for the sea cucumbers. You put fish, siganid, that clean the nets, right? Puts the feces, improves the holothurian, and where it's suitable, put the mussels. They clean the water. So that's the concept. So again, like I said, I always start with the concept, right? So what we do now is conceptually you can yield high value, the trepang and the uni, but also you have pangkain. Pag they need, they can eat the siganid, like the daing, and also the tahong. But the tahong now is very expensive. Actually, they get a lot of side money for that because they grow faster. So while they're waiting, they get additional income for the same investment of the pens because yun ang mahal. So here, just to give you, this is where we're piloting again around Santiago Island. Treatments, monoculture, with cage urchin, with urchin free-ranging with the sea cucumber, with urchin and siganid in the pen in Silaki, where they're abundant, or where you cannot have sea urchins like rongos because there's no seagrass. You use a bigger 50 grams based again on a previous study and put mussels. And here is the growth rate in rongos. If you stock with 50 grams, look at the growth rate. 3 times faster than in the seagrass, right? Because now the bigger, they can utilize more high nutrient food. No? So another way to diversify, so it never stops, is to culture other species, develop the culture of other species. And I already mentioned Stichopus horrens, and this is a fascinating species complex. Another story for Rachel and Isa to tell you about biochemical and stuff. It's a complex, again. So we're trying to culture them. The same thing, the food, the sediment. We published the first one using sargassum juice. They feed very differently from scabra, and you can't release them like scabra because they're not in the seagrass. They don't bury, right? They hide. They're cryptic. So we put shelters, and what did we find out? The very high retrieval rates, the permanence rates, if it's suitable. So that's very good if you have an area-based management because they're spatially explicit. They don't go very far, right? So there's many things. And in a 60-day study, they move from about 20 grams to 75. So they can grow very fast. Okay. So there's a lot of, this is another model organism. Why am I so excited about this? Because many of our marine protected areas are what? Reef. You know, sometimes BFAR would give away juveniles to LGUs and say, oh, we release them to your MPAs. Yeah, reef. Right? So how will the sunfish survive there? Right? So yes, there's an opportunity. There's more MPAs that are reef and managed reefs where restocking may be more important. And so the study starts. Biology on microhabitats is the early work of Nadia. Understanding behavior is important. What is their pattern? Behavioral patterns over time. What do they do? Ange looked at the effect of light, right? And so the development is affected. Photosynthesis, nocturnal feeding is developmentally regulated. They're not born negatively phototactic. It develops. So there's a lot of interesting stuff. You can use animals for developmental studies. And recently, Jerwin published his first paper for thesis using horrens as one of the grazers responding to low pH and increased elevation. Jeannie is working on predation. And here she shows that Dardanus, the same species that eats our, also eats this horrens. So it's really nasty. And remember, Dardanus is more abundant in the reef areas. Right, Michelle? So predation, predator response. So taking all of that, this is my last promise. So how do you increase economic, social, environment benefits? By integrating culture and fishery management. That was the idea, right? Because there's no way you can rebuild stocks with culture stocks. No way. Okay? So we had a communal sea ranch model. We have community-based culture production areas that allows production of juveniles, diversification of culture systems with IMTA, and development of other species. So how do you tie it together? So this is my swan dance and my swan song, tying them all together with the model sea cucumber reserve in Santiago Island. So this is the reserve in Pilar, Victory, and Dewey. This is the sea ranch. This is the 1 hectare community production sites. These are their nursery areas. And the backlads you can use for restocking. As long as but this area will have regulations, permits, exclusive harvest rights in the 1 hectare for those who grow. Finally, implementing the size limits, which is in the law, but nobody can implement because it's hard to monitor the whole municipal fishery. So said, well, let's have an area where we'll do this. Greater than all species, not scabra only, not horrens, all species, right? Not, and this is covered by law. It can be adopted by the municipal and the permit system. Okay, sino lang ang pwede mag-harvest? They say, well, the Dayos take care of that. If I'm not taking care of the sea ranch, how come they only benefit? The other committee members need to benefit, right? So we said, okay, permits for collection outside these culture areas should be granted only to registered fisher folk in Pilar, Victory, and Dili. It gives them an incentive, a stake. And the mayor supported this. We just entered the MOA is giving 2 bantay dagat starting next year for each of the LGUs. We're working with ASI. So here is why he said, okay, we'll do it. So this is the pitch. You have 100 pieces of 100 grammars, you get 10 kilos, right? You dry that, you get half kilo, okay? That fresh 400, you increase a little, 700, but that's XXS. It's reject. You have 100 animals, grow them to 600 grams. Say it takes 1.5 years. You get 60 grams, boil and dry, 4.5 kilos, that's MXL, to 600 is 29. Where can you earn an interest of, in 2 years, from 700 pesos to 29,000 pesos? Okay, so that's how I pitch with businessmen. You have to know what's in it for them. Okay, so, and of course, you have to share the research, development strategies, etc. And so we have been catalyzing and grooming. It's not a one-time thing. So we started in 2018 with ecologically meaningful management units in Northern Luzon. We had a feedback workshops, and just last week, we downloaded the initial findings on diversification. And they had a work plan, and we pitched the idea of the reserve and said, well, BFAR 1, 2, and 3 are there. And said, well, maybe it's about time we push the size limits. Okay. So also, earlier on, we had a network for assessment that was funded by CHED. So we have baseline information on sea cucumber resources in different regions, funded by CHED in SOX. And our sea ranching culture is in different sites, Western Luzon, Eastern Luzon, and Northern Luzon. So yes, there is a prospect, but it should be coupled with fishery. As a scientist, you need a checklist for responsible developing a management plan, genetic resource, disease, development objectives, assessment of impacts, and tactics change depending on the area. So it is imperative now that a lot of the stocks are depleted. We need to rebuild and restore depleted stocks. And culture is one way, and doing it sustainably is important. There should be regular monitoring and evaluation. And as you saw, the problem is sustainability. It has to be done within a socio-ecological system. No? And scaling up is a problem also because sustaining good governance is a problem. Okay? But you have to find ways. No? It has to be inclusive win-win solutions that is suitable to local socio-economic ecological systems. It's not just a Philippine setting. It might be different in one province, another province. And so that's where you need to understand stakeholders. So yes, it works, right? It has additional socioeconomic, cultural benefits. Community partners, empowerment is very important. They're most effective. Sila yung nandun. They're there all the time, and it's their livelihood. We help them. We have to help them. We have to help people help them, the LGU and other people. Okay. So diversification of income streams, important for fishery resource management. So maraming salamat. This is funded through the years. And last pitch on the global scale, sustainable development goals. You know this. Marine biodiversity is our biggest asset. Competitive strategic advantage of the Philippines in a global setting. It is the heart and linked to many other sustainable development goals, and certainly sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, together with healthy ecosystems, will contribute to the well-being, especially of a lot of marginal. Dito sa atin, if you don't know, the poorest sector are the fishers, the rural small-scale fishers, right? So if you want to focus on who do you help, well, I think we should help the marginalist group because they have little alternatives. Bring your science, learn to work with them, or help others help them. So, yun lang. Okay. So, Comments, questions?
Anyone?
So if there are questions from this room, you can just approach the mic so we can be heard sa Zoom. Otherwise, we'll also monitor sa Zoom for any questions there. Ano na kaya? Yeah.
Thank you, Annette, for a very interesting, stimulating talk. The science we need for the ocean we want. Um, reflecting on, like I said, last few slides and thinking ahead, are you hopeful that we can make real progress in Bolinao with this framework that you have put forward? Or put another way, where else um, are we going to be much more hopeful in terms of pushing this forward? Thank you.
Well, I'm hopeful that there can be follow through institutional because they need technical support. But over the years, you cannot bank on one LGU. So I always hedge my bets, right? So the critical point is, first point is supply of the juveniles. Right now, we have hatcheries in different regions that can supply that. We have models to show that you don't have to have hatcheries in all areas. You can have technical hatcheries. We got brood stock from Puerto Princesa, brought it to Coron because they didn't have a hatchery. They spawned there, the babies were returned where they were. So there are, I think, ways. There are culture systems, the supply. So that was a major bottleneck. And once you have hatcheries, because they cannot it's expensive to run hatcheries, so one, you make it cheaper. There are now microalgal concentrates for hatcheries that cannot culture because they don't have a FICO lab. That's a major bottleneck. So you don't have a hatchery for that. You build it in an existing marine hatchery. Deforestation hatcheries all over the country, right? So yes, the infrastructure is there. So you have the supply. So what you need is to train them how to download it to the fisher, and we've shown that it can be done anywhere. Palawan, fishers can do it. Give them the opportunity. So the thing really is finding the LGUs who will take this to the stage where they can realize the benefits. Conceptually, they grow very fast. If you manage them, you can show 2 to 3 years for sure an increase in biomass. So that's quite good because that's within the period of a local government term. It's hard to promise something that's 10 years from now. So, and the other pitch is, well, it should be public investment because this is for public good. It's not for private, right? There's private good for the ones, but even that is part of the job of the LGU because they're supposed to provide livelihood for their constituents, right? And they're supposed to take care of their resources. So this is a win-win. So yes, I'm very hopeful. I don't know, but I'm always hopeful. It has to work somewhere. Uh, Started and so, and the other thing I say is, this is not just for sea cucumbers. If we make a system like this work, it holds for all the other invertebrate fisheries. You know, you take care of the sea cucumbers, you take care of the seagrass in Bolinao, right? Why? Because that's a managed area. Bolinao has so many studies about seagrass. You take care of them, you take care of the other hundreds of species that are gleaned for daily livelihood. So yes, I think it can work. It should work. I mean, the costs are down, the best knowledge is there. You know, a lot of private sectors say, yeah, we want to invest. How many millions do you need? You don't need millions, but you have dedicated. So you need to have in a group the institutions who can work together from the production scheme and then partner with them. So yeah, I think so. I think it can work. It should work. You have private people who can bankroll this because they really need help. So if we were not working with the Asian Social Institute, they still need people and help. They need a startup needs subsidy. Where will they get the puhunan? Even if we don't sell the juveniles, even if we sell them, then it's very cheap because it's post. But the pens, the training, right?
How can we, question from Zoom from an anonymous attendee, how can we influence before DA to apply and adopt these management ecological governance considerations, i.e. presence of strong PO groups, enabling policies, when determining areas to pour resources in and establish sea ranching livelihoods with higher potential for success, sort of sweeping guidelines for the local implementers?
Well, we started in Bolinao. At our last meeting, we had BIFAR 1, 2, and 3. And I have to say, I've worked with some people in BIFAR who really have the heart and passion for this too. So it's not that they don't want to do their work. They are constrained, so to the extent we can address some of the constraint. And it's very important to find progressive LGUs. Because it's a waste of time. So my criteria is always, okay, is it a suitable site? Is it supported by the LGU? And is there a community there who can do this or interested? If the three are not there, I won't do it. It's a waste of time. But I'm hopeful the fishery management area management and the projects are supposed to do this. But again, so we're doing advocacies. It only includes pelagic fish, the management plan. And what about the invertebrate fisheries? What about the nearshore fisheries where you have all your coastal communities? So yes, there's also an advocacy. In fact, we have a group already trying to say, well, let's have a national network on gleaning, just to focus and highlight the importance of not only the invertebrate resources or the ecosystems, but the people dependent on them. So that's why I said at the start, improving resilience, not only of the ecosystems, but also the communities dependent on them. So ganon, no? There's no, yun yung bottom lines. Now, the science is there, the technology is there. So it's really the governance, finding the right partners.
Do you think the existing hatcheries and marine labs are enough? What can architecture do to help marine restoration and practice this in a regenerative manner?
Right now, you can scale up, you can scale in, but for starters, you can actually already work with existing marine hatcheries. Like I said, we've had the fortune of working with commercial hatcheries, Alsons and Palawan Aquaculture. They pick it up like that. It's easy. Okay. So compared to fish. So I don't think we have to wait to build more hatcheries that are not operational. First, very expensive, utilities, technical skills required. So we should focus on strategic planning within a region. The hatcheries, like I said, can provide support, no? And already they're talking, well, if you bring broodstock to this BIFAR hatchery, then they can release, no? So BIFAR 8, BIFAR 3 have been doing good work in the areas where they're working. In partnership with D1 Development Foundation, we have one of the best and progressive PO groups there with the support of the Alliance of LGUs. So the social capital is very important. It's not one thing. So you look for areas where they have experience in CRM, they have record in management, because you cannot build it in 3 years. Any other questions? Pwede naman ibato niyo sa akin. Sabihin niyo na lang. Just comments. Okay lang. Challenge yan sa inyo. You have to think out of the box.
Actually, that's related to what I was asking because here we have a room full of young grad students. So what would you tell them as they embark on parang they pick their life project or passion project?
Yeah.
So how do you, I mean, aside from inverts, how do you tie it in yung mga parang personal passions with, say, with
Well, if you decide to be in science, I always tell this to my students, scientists has a role that cannot be done by anybody else. It's to generate new knowledge. Don't forget that. So you need to contribute to the growth in knowledge, tropical ecosystems, whatever. It's a contribution to science, and Filipino scientists can contribute. So it's a sense of patriotism also. We're good. We have the resources, right? We don't want to be collectors. We want to be in charge of managing our resources. And scientists have a very good role, but you also have to work with other sectors, you know, the advocacies, the NGOs. So choose where you can hedge your bet better, but have a network of like-minded people to work, because it takes different people. No? So you're not isolated. You're an early career professional, but if you know where you're going, like I said, in my case, it's always, well, I have a concept. Theoretically, ito yung elements yan. This can work, right? But I'm always a person of proof of concept. Daming concept, diba? Daming theories, no? So think about it. No? So I always say, well, you have to be solution-oriented if you want to do resource management. So you might not be able to do it agad-agad, but if it's in the back of your hand and you're looking it forward, then you'll get there. But if you don't even think about it, you'll never get there. So yeah, use your science. We need scientists. Nobody else can generate new knowledge. Kailangan yan. You can communicate. It's better to communicate your science. You talk with experience. Talk to the people, right? Link and work with the fishermen. So yun, siguro sa akin, I was fortunate. De facto, my earliest mentors were fishermen. Because I had to do work on spiny lobster, fishery and management. Dr. Gomez was my project leader and advisor. He was busy building an institute. Here you are. I had to learn the ropes from logistics. So I didn't know where to go. We didn't have the references you guys have now. So where did I go? I went to the spear fishermen, the lobster fishermen. Went with them, asked them, went spear diving with them, looking at where they found the lobsters. So it was like, eventually later on, it's participatory action research pala in social. I didn't know. I didn't know the jargon. I just did it. And I learned a lot working. From Cagayan, I would go to Cagayan and they would be there. They're moving depending on the season. And I learned, wow, you know, and they're well, that's the humanity aspect. You see how little they have and they give so much. You talk to the POs. If you hear the POs, he said, well, I'm not hoping to earn much from this in the last meeting we had, but I'm hoping that this is my little contribution to making sure that the next generation will still have a livelihood. And it means so much to them. Everybody needs a reason. So do not underestimate. They don't measure value the way we value it. It's not monetary. It's cultural. It's a belief. Sometimes it's spiritual. But hey, you know, so ganun, no? So everybody, pero do your science. Be very good at what you do, because if you do that, people will trust you. And it's not for you. It's not just self-actualization. It's just thinking of what can I use this for.
Doc, considering the local genetic integrity of our sea urchins and sea cucumbers, would it be imperative that we inhibit the movement of invertebrate broodstock from one province to another for purposes of stock enhancement?
Yeah. So again, in principle, you don't want to do translocation, diba? You know, that's how hubs spread, diba? The transfer of shellfish, right? Well, we don't know enough about the sea cucumbers. They're deposit feeders. So the idea is really avoid translocation and take biosafety precautions. And that's why the idea is you get the broodstock, bring it to the hatchery for spawning and babalik. Pero hindi doon i-release. I-release uli yung juveniles doon sa pinanggalingan. Even if you bring it to another hatchery in another province, babalik siya doon sa pinanggalingan. Right? I mean, that's the only precautionary approach we can do now. Yeah.
Do you have ongoing projects on seagrasses and sandfish by which academes in Samar could engage in?
Well, we have a big project in Eastern Samar with Gabuan Development Foundation. NFRDI can produce. So if you have studies there, I don't do seagrass per se, but sandfish is definitely seagrass. So yeah. So UPTAC, get in touch with Gabuan Development Foundation, si Dean March, you know, and then she works with POs there. And then whoever, you know. I have students who are in Visca who knows how to culture. I have former students in BIFAR Region 6, so they're all over. I have students in Davao, so I keep telling them now, you guys can get together. You know how this works. You can work with hatcheries. You know the technology. So there are in Cagayan State, we have students there that they can link up with BIFAR, you know, tap these people who know how to do this stuff and complement the work. Okay na? Yes. Okay, so my take on this is, you know, the reason you have population structuring is because those stocks are adapted to those conditions, right? So for productivity purposes, in principle, they're better to stay in those stocks. They're adapted for those stocks. The downside of mixing is diluting the genetic diversity. So I think it's too risky, and I must say that we have a lot of species, and you know, it's a win-win. There are losers and winners. Ang tingin ko, in some cases, some sea cucumbers or urchins, well, particularly sea cucumbers, may be winners. For example, in eutrophication, they like organic materials. Of course, too much of it is always bad. The urchins, of course, problems, never mind climate change, but eutrophication, destruction of the seagrass. So the one that I showed you, is it because there is a recruitment failure, and is it because of the habit, or is it because in Bolinao the environment has changed so much? So, and that's not even climate change. I think I would not go and hybrid. There's natural hybridization. Like I said, the Horens is a complex of 3 species, so they do. So maybe if the hybrids do better, then they will just take the natural process of speciation.
From Mamalu, I think. I am glad to see you're trying IMTA. How is it working? Some years back, we tried polyculture, but it was difficult to keep sea cucumbers alive. What difference are what different are you doing now? What are you doing?
Hi, Lou. The time we were doing that, remember we had that concept. We produce a handful of juveniles, and you were doing them in mesocosm trials in the tanks, right? We're doing them in the ocean. So that's why it works. Because, you know, yeah, the flushing, the nutrients. So, but if you do them in the mesocosm, hindi talaga. But of course, we cannot, the baby juveniles cannot work in high organic materials. The thesis of Raf showed that. Pero pag they're 50 grammars already, so you have to grow them bigger. They can take organic materials. So we were able to grow them in Rongos, for example. But in the pilot sites now, the best performing, aside from Rongos, is the one in Silaki, where there is siganid, urchin, and juveniles. We're using them for juveniles. So yes, so it's really the ocean systems. I remember, yeah, that was one of our AFMA projects with Bell, with no? So they tried work and Edna with the seaweed. So baka we can work it now, and also we're trying the idea of circular, no? So there's a lot of debris, macrophyte debris. Now we can use to enrich sediment, right? Why is it not used, right? So I think we have more information now, Lou, and a lot of juveniles, lots and lots of them.
So if there are no more questions, we would. Sorry.
So if there are no more questions, anyone? Comments? Okay na tayo. Then if no more, then we would like to thank Dr. Maria Antonette Juinio-Meñez for this very inspiring talk today on behalf of all of MSI. Thank you. Palakpakan po natin.
For this series is Irene Rodriguez, uh, to on the 16th of this month. So we hope that we will see you again. Do tell your friends that there is this series. The faculty members are preparing their best to lay out information from work of from several decades. So it gives you a history of the work, but at the same time, where we want our science to go to. Okay? So magandang hapon sa lahat. Salamat, Anette.
Shell.